Hi there, everyone. My name is Sydney Fussell. I'm a reporter with Wired Magazine, where I cover surveillance, policing, privacy, and many of the issues that you just saw referenced in the trailer for Coded Bias. I'm very excited to be with you here tonight as I meet with the director of Coded Bias and many of the activists and advocates that are in the film as well. Just to sort of start off with, I'd love to sort of go through with the panelists that are going to be with us here later today. As we go through our conversation, if you have any questions, please use the hashtag coded bias on social. And to begin with our panel, which I'm sure will be a very rich, very complicated, and maybe even scary conversation, we have with us Shalini Kantaya, the director of Coded Bias. How are you doing, Shalini?
Hi, Sydney. Thanks so much for having us.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much for joining with us. Alongside Shalini, we also have Joy Bulamwini. She is the leading subject of the film. She's a computer scientist, poet, activist, and founder of the Algorithmic Justice League.
What's up?
And another subject that's featured in the film that we have with us here tonight is Kathy ONeil. Kathy ONeil is a mathematician, a data scientist, a Bloomberg opinion columnist, and the author of Weapons of Math Destruction, one of the leading texts in algorithmic research.
So glad to be here.
Thank you so much. We also have with us Daniel Santos. He's a Houston public school professor who we see in the film fighting back against an unfair algorithm that was ranking teachers based on their performance. And then finally, we have with us Trinae Moore, and she's an artist, an activist, and founded the Atlantic Towers Tenant Association, a group of people that fought back against facial recognition being used against residents of her apartment complex in Brooklyn. Thanks for coming in tonight, Trinae.
Thanks for having me. So excited to be here with you all.
Awesome, awesome. Well, just taking it back to Shalini, the director. First question, one of the major themes of this film is that even though these systems are very powerful, they can be fought when we're all sort of together fighting them. So how did you meet this group of people, have them all come together, and what did you learn from them in terms of overcoming these systems?
Thank you so much for that. I just want to start by saying that this is my dream panel, one of my dream panels, I would say. So many inspiring people on this panel. And I just want to start by giving everyone a cordial welcome to the New York theatrical premiere of Coded Bias. It is so thrilling for me to finally be able to share this timely film with you. And I want to thank the Metrograph Theater for their incredible platform to share this film and this moment with you. I also just want to say how much I miss seeing your faces in the theater, especially a theater as cool as the Metrograph on the Lower East Side of New York, and tell you how much I can't wait to be back in the cinema with you when it's safe. And then I just want to take a moment to honor and thank the brilliant and badass cast of the film, some of whom are here tonight, some of whom are not, in just schooling me and giving me information that I can sort of pass on to audiences through the film Coded Bias. And just also want to recognize that the film is really built on a body of scholarship and journalism and activism that's happening for a long time, and so many voices of whom I could not include in the film. I just want to recognize all the voices that are contributing to this vibrant conversation that we're having. And speaking of coming together, I feel like this particular panel is very meaningful to me because Joy and Kathy were two of the first interviews I did for the film when I was just sort of seeing if there was a documentary, if there might be a story there. And I didn't know they were actually friends, and I did their interviews first. And I think I was not only astounded by their scholarship. I think not only is Kathy a Harvard mathematician that once was trying to teach me how she knitted pie into a sweater, And Joy's scholarship is like groundbreaking and has transformed an industry. But also, and I only get half of what they say, and half is sort of a lot, and we only get a fragment in the film, which I'm so happy to share with you. But also, on top of being such astute scholars with such integrity of scientific method and thought, also have this unique ability to translate that to the people whose lives and opportunities and rights are at stake. And I really relied on the scholarship of the cast of the film and others to find the two local heroes that are here tonight, Trinae and Daniel. Daniel is like won Teacher of the Year 100 times. And when an algorithm wrongly accused him of being a bad teacher arbitrarily in a model that's controversial, we know because of Kathy's scholarship, he fought back and organized a teachers union. And not only did he win his case, he created an environment where he called for a more humane way of evaluating teachers. And I thought that was incredible and brave. And Trinae Moran, she started her journey, didn't know what biometric data was when her landlord arbitrarily tried to install facial recognition just to get in her house, of which she was a third generation resident. And instead of sort of, saying, we don't understand this, these people have power, this is a landlord, Trinae, along with her neighbors and her community, fought back using research that Kathy and Joy produced and signed, and letters that they signed, and sort of empowered her friends and neighbors around this technology. And not only did she keep her landlord from installing this technology, but she inspired some of the first legislation to protect other residents from being subject to this kind of invasive surveillance facial recognition technology. So I just want to say that everyone on this panel is an incredible game changer and making real waves in leading us to a deeper place in our humanity in the technologies of the future. And I feel so grateful because I feel like because of the work of the people on this panel and the people in my film and so many others, that we have a real moonshot moment to call for more ethics in technology. And I'm so grateful that Coded Bias can be a part of that, of sparking those conversations.
Excellent.
So that's a long-winded way of how I met the crew.
Awesome. Well, to kick off tonight's discussion, I was hoping we could start with Joy. So the film, a lot has happened. A lot has happened in the past week, but certainly a lot has happened since the filming of Coded Bias. And I was hoping you could tell the audience a little bit about sort of like the latest in terms of this ongoing conversation that we're having about facial recognition. I was just looking at facial recognition is being used for college exam proctoring because so many people are taking these exams remotely and things like that. So what are the latest, advances, if you will, of facial recognition, and what are some of your concerns since Coded Bias was filmed?
Yeah, so we started this journey back in 2018, believe it or not. And so at that time, when the research that was based on my MIT thesis, and then I published with Dr. Timnit Gebru, and then subsequently more research with Deb Raji, all of whom are in the film, it was hard to even get people to pay attention or understand why it mattered that these technologies were out in the world, because oftentimes it was behind the scenes. Maybe law enforcement is using it, but it's not necessarily in your face. To your point, Sydney, now people are starting to see it in the real world, right? Whether it's for exam proctoring or maybe some Snapchat filters, they're different ways in which it's showing up. For me, what was a major shift in 2020 was the fact that you had IBM, Microsoft, and also Amazon step back from selling facial recognition technologies. And this is in no small part because of the ongoing movement for Black liberation, the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd, coupled with the advocacy and the research all coming together in that moment. And what it showed me that I wasn't so sure of when I started this journey with Shalini back in 2018 is that we don't have to accept this narrative of that there's nothing that can be changed. Once the technology's out of the bag, we can't resist. And I mean, we see this with Trinea, you know, the Brooklyn tenants, right? We can resist. And we're also seeing it in cities across the US, right? And so whether it's Portland, we had a unanimous ban of face surveillance. In Boston, I was really privileged to have the opportunity to testify there. And we finally have a federal bill that would put a moratorium on police use of facial recognition technology and other remote biometrics. So we've come a long way, but there's still quite a bit of ways to go. We still have companies like HireVue that say, you have a video of your face, we do a job interview, we're going to compare you with prior top performers. And so there's still ways in which these technologies can be harmful, even if they're intended to be good.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And so definitely one of the things you mentioned was that things are very different now than they were a few years ago. We're definitely standing on the shoulders of people who were doing a lot of those early research, including yourself and as well, Kathy ONeil, who's here with us here tonight, who wrote the wonderful book, Weapons of Mass Destruction, which one of the things that's very interesting is, Joy, I know you started off in more of an academic context, but Kathy, you were sort of doing one of the evildoers, right? You were sort of doing finance, you were looking at the numbers from that perspective. And now you're very critical of things like recommendation systems and these sort of like stock manipulating algorithms. So what sort of had you cross over from the dark side to the light side, and how have things changed for you since then?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. I guess the answer is I was like a very, very apolitical nerd who joined a hedge fund in 2006. So I saw the financial crisis from the front row. And after spending a little bit of time getting thoroughly disillusioned with the role that mathematicians had played, I left and joined Occupy Wall Street, where my real education began. I kept on telling my fellow occupiers, like, our group is here to think about financial reform. And people kept on wanting to talk about race and power and gender. And I was like, guys, you're missing the point. And they're like, no, Kathy, you're missing the point. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm missing the point. And in the meantime, I was working as a data scientist in ad tech after having left finance. And I started realizing that everything that they were teaching me in Occupy was playing out quite directly in the world, my new world of data science, where instead of predicting the markets, I was using my mathematical skills to predict humans. But I was really just basically segregating humans by the people that are lucky and making them luckier, and the people that are unlucky and making them unluckier, along the same old-fashioned lines of race, class, gender. And I was like, this is not good. Looked around, didn't find other people who were worried about it. So I started doing some research. So the short answer is I was radicalized.
Got it. Awesome. And so one of the things I just love how you put it. You were using algorithms to sort people that were already lucky and make them luckier, and unlucky people and make them unluckier. And that sort of seems to be sort of like the motif of a lot of different types of algorithms. In addition to talking about financial algorithms, you also were one of the first people to be talking about this sort of like education, teacher performance, ranking, scoring situation. It's a disaster, but I'd love to sort of talk to Mr. Daniel Santos, the Houston public school teacher, who one of the things that you talked about was this idea that the way that the algorithm was judging what a good teacher was very arbitrary and wasn't based on things like compassion for students or pushing them along. What was it like in that moment of realizing that you were being graded, quote unquote, by an algorithm? And what did you feel like the algorithm was getting wrong?
So thank you for inviting me, Sydney. And now that I'm unmuted, I do want to recognize the 4 badass women who are here with us for speaking truth to power and sharing the truth. So I feel unworthy. So thank you for being part of this conversation. In Houston, I did feel I felt insulted when our district decided to invest in an artificially intelligent black box closed in secrecy to make judgments about teachers like me, that this algorithm was infallible, that this algorithm is impossible to question. It was unquestionable. And so it felt frustrating. Because I could see the injustice, I could witness daily the impact on my colleagues, on teachers, the demoralization as teachers, great teachers who invested in their community and supported the community with community schools and involving stakeholders and parents and other factors that can't be measured by algorithms and equations. So it as Kathy pointed out, it radicalized me in 2014 as I witnessed the injustice, as I experienced the injustice, as I was faced with the notion, either believing this equation that I'm a bad teacher and not believe my lying eyes when I could see and witness all that I was able to contribute to my students and their lives. So I think this is an important conversation for all of us. It's a wake-up call that we need to speak up when we witness injustice and tell the Wizard of Oz, we will not believe your data. Sorry, we will speak up and we will demand the equity that we don't see in our everyday lives, especially in public education in our historically underserved schools. So thank you, Sydney, for asking.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Daniel. I really enjoy what you were saying about sort of like believing your own lying eyes, because we know that when you speak truth to power, the first thing power says is, well, you're the one with the problem and you're the one who sort of like, it almost makes you gaslight yourself. And so I'd love to turn the conversation over to Sherna. Sherna, you were fighting against facial recognition being implemented against other residents of your apartment complex without consent. And one of the things that the landlord was saying to you was like, well, it's our building, we can do that, people like it, this will help, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell us what that felt like, and also how you were able to get out of that like psychological trap of like, well, maybe they're right, maybe I should just go along with it? Like, how did you break free from that?
So this is back in 2018 as well. So, well, I was already beginning to question technology. This is like when Snapchat started and the iPhone X had just came out, and I had just recently gotten that phone. It's like $1,000 phone with this facial recognition feature on it. And I read the terms on the iPhone, and the terms on the iPhone read something like it would track my face through time. And when I got this notice that my building was going to get facial recognition systems, I automatically thought about the terms in the Apple terms for the iPhone facial recognition systems. And I was just like, this is not going to be good at all. And then it was just so awkward how we received the information as well. We have pretty good communication with our building management. And we were not notified of this. It was being done in a very sneaky way. We were notified by the Department of Housing and Community Renewals about this modification to our security system. But after like doing a bit of research and finding Joy's work, which really just lit me up and on fire, I was like, oh no, these are the facts right here. There's a clearly like thought out website here. Like, it was very easy to share Joy's research with my neighbors because it was very digestible. It was language that we could all understand, and it just helped me like share what I had learned with my neighbors, who are mostly elderly people who live in this 24-story complex, who were at risk of having their faces scanned. Like, it was way too many complications. Just women, children, and elderly people, which are the group of people who these systems don't work for. And on top of that, we're brown, we're melanated people. So these systems really don't work for us based on the research I found from Joy. So yes, I feel like I might be going a little over, but yes, I'll just stop there.
No. Go on, go on. I love that. I love what you were saying about the importance of Joy's research. And, this next question is for Joy, which is, between 2018 and now, there has been a lot of interest in this space of, algorithmic fairness and things like that. But it can get very complex, and it can a lot of those advances are still sort of like trapped in the academic space. What's your recommendation to academics in the audience in terms of making that information digestible? And, is there a way that we can create an army of Trinays, create some type of pipeline where academics are, using the wonderful research to light a fire under people and not just keeping it, on archive.com or something like that? You're muted, Joy.
I'm off of mute. Okay, it's such a wonderful question in terms of how to make research digestible, because oftentimes as researchers, we're not incentivized to make our research accessible. Trinae was talking about the website with gender shades and so forth. This was going well above and beyond what was expected, or even creating a poem like AI Ain't I a Woman, where we're going from performance metrics to performance arts so that the impact of these systems is felt. And I think I would highly encourage researchers not to shy away from making their work accessible. I was just at a conversation this afternoon from a group did a comic called Data Responsibly, where they're actually trying to make this kind of research more accessible. And so I think rewarding people in terms of incentivizing, where you can see it makes a difference when people see the impact of what you're doing. The other thing that I oftentimes see is there's such a focus on this notion of fairness without thinking about equity, or algorithmic bias without thinking about harm. So let's look at the example of the Brooklyn tenants. Even if you had perfectly accurate facial recognition systems, right now you have the specter of mass surveillance. So it's not just this question of how well are these systems performing on different groups, but also what kinds of harms can come from them when they're in the real world. And so again, to researchers, I would highly encourage that, yes, we can talk about bias. Yes, we can talk about different potential metrics for fairness. But if we're not thinking about justice, if we're not thinking about equity, we're in our little bubble publishing papers without then connecting with the real world. And one thing I truly appreciate about the film is it shows what it looks like when you put research into action. And that's well beyond the lab, right? You're over there at the hearings, or you're at community gatherings, but you're stepping out of the lab so that the work can make a real world impact.
Excellent. And going off of that, one of the things that is in the film, which I love, which is, Kathy, you come up with this idea of what if there was an FDA for algorithms? What if there was an agency where you could audit and investigate algorithms being used in the public space? And not sure if anyone's aware, but apparently there's been a new administration in a couple months. We'll see how that goes. It's a little bit of a dice roll right now. But Kathy, if President-elect Biden comes to you and says, Kathy, FDA for algorithms, here's the money, let's do it, what are you doing on day one?
Oh my God. Fantasy come true, Sydney. I guess I would say, let's make sure that the existing laws that exist in hiring, the space of hiring, the space of credit, insurance, the anti-discrimination laws, what does it mean for them to be compliant when they're algorithmic? The answer is we haven't really said what that means. We haven't codified it. And as a result, most of the companies that have replaced their human processes with algorithms, which is most companies in those spaces, simply don't care. They simply do not address, I'm not saying all of them, but many of them sort of just skate along hoping that they aren't being more outrageous than their competitors. So the answer is, Sydney, like, just as drugs have to be proved that they are both safe and effective before the FDA approves them, I claim that algorithms should have to prove that they are safe and effective, which means at the very least that they're compliant with existing law. So we have to figure out what that means.
Got it, got it. And I'd love to turn this over to Trinae and Daniel and just ask them essentially the same question, which is one of the things that you both had to do was sort of like fight through a structure in order to get some semblance of power and get your voices heard. And so I was hoping you sort of both speak to just sort of like urgency, like what is most urgent for you if someone were to say to you, hey, I was at a PTA meeting and I heard that they're ranking teachers by this, or Trinae, if someone were to like DM you on Facebook and be like, hey, like, like over in, Fort Greene, I think that I saw some weird cameras and I didn't know what that was about. Like, what's your advice to people who might be in that similar situations? Because one of the things that you both go through is this sort of like, is this really happening to me? And like, what do I do about it? So how do you help people fight through that haze of not even being sure what they're being subjected to?
Well, step one with my community, and echoing Joy and Kathy and Trinae, is they are heroes, and we need to remind our community, our stakeholders, that they have the right to speak up if their teachers, for instance, are rated ineffectively using an algorithm that has been shown to be false, and if they wish to defend their community schools and ensure that they have the best faculty for their students and not be afraid. I think this year we have seen an uprising for justice and equity, and I'm hopeful, and that's why I think this is the best year for this documentary to have its premiere, is that people are galvanized for equity and justice, and people are raising questions, and they're not afraid. And I think when I first spoke up, I did have that element of fear. What will happen to my career? Will I have that scarlet letter of letter I for ineffective if I speak up? And so when I spoke up, it was incredible to see the support from hundreds of and thousands of teachers across the district. So not being afraid, educating oneself. I love that Joy mentioned earlier is having that research accessible in public education. The research with respect to algorithmic evaluations of teachers need to be accessible, and we have professors at the University of Houston have been calling for that also. So I invite our audience, be brave, be courageous, speak up. This is the moment. This is where we can make change, and you're not alone. There's 4 of us here, 5 of us, but there are thousands out there who will stand with us shoulder to shoulder to ensure that equity and justice and with these algorithms can be changed. So please do not be afraid. You are not alone. So thank you. That's would be my advice: is reach out and embrace our brothers and sisters and demand change. We cannot be silent, and we cannot be silenced.
And Trinae?
My piece of advice would kind of just be echoing Daniel, in that people should just have the audacity to ask. Like, if you see something weird or different in your neighborhood, ask someone about it. Ask building management, at whoever that camera is on, go in that building and ask them, hey, like, what's that camera for? What is it? What is that about? Do some research and share with the other people in your community. I like how Daniel brought up fear, because fear was a major, I mean, it still is kind of there with me, because I'm fighting this in my home. I live here. This is a complex, an over surveilled complex that has security and surveillance already here. We managed to push back on the facial recognition, but we're still living with the current surveillance that was already here, and he wanted to build on top of, kind of making this place Fort Knox or a juvenile center, pretty much. So yeah, fair, like, we have to like let that go a bit, and just know that there are, like Daniel said, there are other people out there that are like kind of fighting the same fight. Like, fear was definitely like within me, but knowing that I had my neighbors and I had the tennis association, we were kind of all fighting this fight together, and like there for each other, on the lookout if anything odd was going on. That definitely helped numb the fear effect when it came to just getting the job done, sharing the information, and kind of putting ourselves at risk. Also, don't be afraid to seek out some legal counsel. Go to your local legal service providers and ask them questions. Like, just have the audacity to ask. Don't feel like any of your questions are silly questions, because this is new. We are in a space of completely new technology. Like, the iPad came out in like 2010. So we are now seeing issues come out of just technology, and this is new to a lot of people who are not in academia. So don't be afraid of the fact that you don't know what some of these acronyms mean, or you don't know what certain things mean. Google is great, okay? Just Google the words and terms that you find, and it will give you some backbone for your pushback. It did for me. And books like Kathy's books. I mean, and I mean, the research is there. We just have to find it. And don't just not be afraid to talk to people to find those keywords, because that was a major factor for me in the beginning, was just figuring out what to Google. I had the term biometric data, but I had nothing else. But after reading Joy's Ginger Shades and watching a few TED Talks and things, I was able to build an arsenal of vocabulary words that I knew nothing about, and I started from there. And that just helped me get the information out to my neighbors and the pushback and get support.
Got it. One of the things that's sort of like running through our conversation is that there's a lot of different ways to reach people, either through academic papers or through art or through poetry, performance art. And I'd love to turn the question over to Shalini in terms of, this is a documentary, but there's so many different ways to use moving images to like connect with people. I know you're a big sci-fi fan, which is like very, fantastical and things like that. So, for the like filmmakers, screenwriters, producers in the audience, the people who maybe aren't, documentaries aren't their thing, like what are the ways that you feel like you can reach out to people who sort of need to be woken up about like all these different issues? Maybe they're not into lengthy books or academic articles or even a docs. Like what's the way to like connect to people like that?
Well, I think there's this film that they can watch called Coded Bias that's in theaters. I think that why I made the film is I actually hope that it'll be a tool for social change. I come from a tradition of filmmakers that use film as a tool to inspire and engage people to take action. So, I mean, part of what I hope the film does is connect researchers and try to distill. And I have to say, even for me, it was so humbling to sit with some of the smartest people. I think there are like 7 PhDs in my film, and try to distill this into something that is intelligible and the rest of us can sort of access in some way. And I think the film seeks to be both, to help us be able to empower ourselves, like the knowledge, like Trinae says, to ask questions and to not say, oh, I can't, this is math, this is, this big magic of algorithms. And I think that what I hope that we will do more often, that the film begins to do, is start to connect science to those who have the most at stake by its impacts and its lessons. And we've seen with the current crisis, multiple crises that we're dealing with, that we vitally need science communication that the public can understand so that we can make responsible decisions. So I mean, I'm so grateful to Kathy and to Joy to like making this accessible to what I call myself like a barstool scientist who can sort of try to distill this content. But these are systems that are impacting all of our lives, and we all need education. We all need to understand how these tools work. And on the Coded Bias website, codedbias.com/take action, there are a lot of partnership organizations that are doing great work in this field. And there's also a reading list, including Kathy's book and Joy's TED Talk, and lots of research that's being done all over the country that you can access on the website. So I just hope that people will start to understand the issues and tap into an organization that, like the Algorithmic Justice League, that's already doing work to push it forward.
Awesome. Very well said. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. Again, if you have questions, please use the hashtag Coded Bias. This first question is about federal oversight. This comes from Rebecca Brown from the Innocence Project. There seems to be a strong need, as Kathy ONeil noted in the film, for an FDA for algorithms. Can Joy and Kathy share their thoughts about how it might be structured to enable authentic community involvement and oversight? Obviously, we don't want just like another bloated regulatory agency not really doing a lot.
I'll just jump in if that's okay, and then I'll ask Joy to make more suggestions. Yeah, like so I actually, full disclosure, run an algorithmic auditing firm, a consulting firm called Orca, and our practice essentially is facilitating conversations among the stakeholders of algorithms, algorithms in context. So we have to sort of like fix not just what the algorithm is doing, but what the consequences of the algorithm are for the people around us. And we often, in fact, we always ask stakeholders, ask the question, for whom might this fail? I feel like that's the critical question that so many algorithmic harms come from, because it wasn't asked. Like if we had just asked, for whom might this fail, to the Facebook algorithm before they decided to optimize to engagement without thinking about what could go wrong, then we would be living in a stronger democracy. But having said that, like every single algorithmic audit comes down to a facilitated conversation between the different stakeholder groups, representatives of stakeholders, asking them, what would it mean for this? What would it mean to you for this algorithm to fail or to succeed? And I really think that that's the right way to facilitate these conversations, and that we're not going to actually end up with ethical artificial intelligence until we actually bring the people into the room to talk about what it might mean for them, for this to have algorithmic harm unfairly, unjustifiably burdened onto their shoulders. But I'd love to hear from Joy as well.
Yes, so to add to that, we've been thinking about this quite deeply with the Algorithmic Justice League, and we have a new project. It's about to come out. It's called CRASH, Community Reporting of Algorithmic Systemic Harms. And the whole idea behind that is really trying to get at how do we bring everyday people in? Because I strongly believe if you have a face, you have a place in this conversation. The people have a voice and a choice. So how do we actually operationalize that? And part of it is making sure that there are actually mechanisms for redress of harm. So any kind of a system that we create, whether it's at a governmental level or you're doing it within companies, is to say, okay, we can do all we can to try to address bias and other issues. But when we actually see harms, what are the mechanisms that are in place, right? So you can actually redress those harms. And sometimes you don't know there's a harm in the first place. So what are the mechanisms in place to discover and disclose those harms and to have incentives, right? We heard throughout the panel this notion of fear. And there's so many people who see issues who are afraid to speak up. We collect stories with the Algorithmic Justice League Bias in the Wild reports. And part of this is saying, please do share your story in the capacity that you're comfortable with, right? Because depending on where you sit within society, you might have real reasons to be fearful. So I think it's really important that we actually create ways where people can disclose harms, where they will be protected. And then we create pathways where there can be a true redress of harm. So it's not an ethics washing, but there's actually true accountability. The other thing that any kind of structure needs to make sure is centered are the voices of those who are most marginalized. And even when we see, new administrations coming in and so forth, it is the usual voices that already have power that then get centralized. And so those who are most at risk for being harmed are oftentimes continue to be marginalized. So in structuring such a system, making sure that the voices of those who are harmed isn't an add-on, a nice to have, a token sort of situation, but it's actually central would be critical. And in fact, AJL, we did a white paper looking at what a federal office looking specifically at facial recognition technologies could look like, to try to actually figure it out in some capacity. And it's really complex. And one of the hardest parts of doing that work was, again, how do we bring in the experts with experience? Because so often we put experts like Kathy or myself with the degrees and so forth, and we leave out experts like Daniel and Sherna, whose real lived experiences are absolutely invaluable. And so I think we also need to shift where we're thinking expertise comes from.
Excellent, excellent. Very well said. This next question I would love to hear from Daniel. It comes from a viewer. It says, can you speak about, it says, I work with a nonprofit that helps teens embrace their power and voice. How do we translate this message to connect with them? What resources can we provide the youth?
So, perfect question. I want to elaborate with Kathy and Joy just alluded to it, empowering people, and not just we adults, but us adults, but also teenagers. And I administer a student congress at my campus for the past 10 years, and I've empowered them by directing them to alternative resources and alternative media about issues that are important to them with respect to artificial intelligence and the abuse of algorithms. I think sharing those resources with teenagers who are questioning how is this being utilized, the unintended consequences of algorithms in our lives, and giving them that space, giving them the freedom to be able to speak up. My student congress 3 years ago had a walkout when the situation in Florida occurred, and it was their idea to speak up against gun violence, and because they felt safe, they were empowered to speak up. And I think with our teenagers is first developing, giving them that freedom. Their voice is just as valuable as Joy's and Kathy's and Trene's and Shalini. They are our future leaders. They're the ones who will be able to advocate for a change to these algorithms, which are that have been intrusive and have been used in punitive ways in our country. So as a sponsor of a student congress is allowing that space for them to speak up and letting them know authentically, your voice matters just as any adults. And I think that's where we're seeing this year manifest in many of our young adults and in our schools. And I think we need to encourage that. The change will come. And as a history teacher, I know it never comes from the top. It always comes from our young people. And I have faith in our young people when you give them that space and you educate them and you provide them those resources. And I dare say a plug, perhaps Coded Bias may be one resource. Let's send them to a screening and they can find a different perspective. Give them a seat at the table. They deserve it. So thank you for that excellent question.
I love that. And can I add to it, one of my favorite memories with AJL thus far is working with the Boston Public Library and local teenagers on a project called Drag versus AI. And so this was a hands-on workshop that we did together, Boston Public Library, ACLU, Massachusetts, and the Algorithmic Justice League. And what I loved was the curiosity, the energy, and the passion that so many of the students brought. And the questions they were asking, and the connections they were making were so spot on. And it just showed me how much potential we have, right, with the youth movement that's going on when we're talking about this fight for algorithmic justice. So we are at the Algorithmic Justice League working on resources that are meant to connect with people of all ages, but especially young folks as well, as someone who's also young, right? But I highly encourage people to check out the Drag versus AI workshop, which again was influenced by working with teenagers, asking all of the right questions as we put on different looks to drag the system.
Excellent, excellent. And that sort of deals with this next question. And I'd love to hear from all of you. The question is, can you speak about each of the big tech companies as far as current hiring practices on AI ML teams? Obviously, AI ML artificial intelligence, machine learning, how diverse are they and which ones are best / worst? And I'd also like to hear from Kathy, Joy, and Daniel about if you're a young person who's interested in this space, but you're also seeing all this harm and damage, that it's sort of like a weird thing, like, hey, come into this space and fix it, right? It's sort of like you have two jobs. You have to like just do the job of software engineering or whatever your interest is, but also sort of like cleaning up. So on the one hand, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts about the importance of diversifying, research teams, but also that sort of double bind of come diversify the team and then also deal with all this other racist, sexist, misogynist, et cetera, et cetera. How do you sort of get young people excited, given all that? Looks like we're losing. Kathy, would you like to start, and then we'll throw it back to
Yeah. Well, listen, I speaking as somebody who was in mathematics and then hedge fund and then data science, I can tell you it is extremely homogeneous. I was, I think, the only female quant at my hedge fund, which was not a small hedge fund. And there are problems that stem from that, very real problems. And it is kind of like just a monoculture in so many different ways. It's problematic. I am so excited. I'm not going to say that problem has been solved whatsoever, but I'm so excited that it has been acknowledged and people do feel responsible to work on it. That doesn't mean it's going to change overnight. But I will say that this field of AI accountability, which that's the way I prefer to think of it, is new. It's exciting. It blends a lot of different skill sets and interests that I think are truly, truly exciting. Having said that, I don't know how many jobs there are that people can take that are truly like righteous positions. Yeah, I personally did the route of like working at a hedge fund, working as a data scientist, learning what was really happening, and then sort of thinking of it as an anthropological study of the cultures. And I don't think that can be done at scale, but it is an option to sort of know who your enemy is, so that you can work really hard against them, because you can speak their language and you have the credentials to be heard. And that's a pretty important thing in today's world.
Yes, to that, I would say we need you. It doesn't fall out of my sight that the work that I've done and have done with other Black women came from voices that tend to be outsiders. And so what I found is being somebody who's outside the norm of the tech bro who's assumed to be the expert and so forth, is it gives me a different experience base to draw on so-called insights, which to a lot of our communities would be like, of course it's not working on us, right? So sometimes I find it funny, some of the things that are viewed as being groundbreaking and so forth are conversations many communities have been having. It's just a conversation that hasn't been happening in heavily male or white dominated spaces. So I would say it's so clearly obvious that tech needs us. And also having the ability to shape the direction of this technology means we can shape it towards our aim. So when I talk about the encoding movement of who codes matters, how we code matters, and why we code matters, the who impacts the why. And so this is why I would encourage more people to come in, but also understand these are toxic environments. Part of what I'm trying to do with my wonderful team at the Algorithmic Justice League is say, what would that org look like, right? From the board level to how we do volunteers to how we engage artists as well. I mean, our board has Kimberly Crenshaw, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, check out her book, Race After Technology. We also have Brenda Wilkerson, CEO of Anita Borg Institute, and Megan Smith, the former CTO of the United States. And I'm chair of the board, right, at 30 years old. And so this is reconfiguring what these sorts of organizations can look like. The other thing that's really important is it's so easy to be siloed within a particular organization and feel alone. I was so grateful to get connected with Dr. Timnit Gebru, then a PhD student at Stanford. And then later on, we brought in Deb Raji. She was at the University of Toronto. I was at MIT. Later on, Deb goes to work for Clarify AI. Timnit is at Microsoft. I'm doing my poet situation thing. But this notion that, oh, you're within one organization or one company and that defines you, we really need to break out of that and think, okay, we're communities infiltrating different systems and we're figuring out how to work the system so we can make sure these systems are not used against us. So I would invite you to come in with a group of friends. The Algorithmic Justice League will be your friends. There are many other groups to get connected with as well.
Got it. And then, Trinae, you also want to speak about the importance of bringing people into these different types of spaces.
Yes, I did. I just wanted to touch on not forgetting about our elderly community. They should be a large part of this conversation, as well as we have a lot of elderly people, and we can't just like leave them in the dust. We have to inform them, as well as they have to use technology now for new reasons with the pandemic and all of this stuff. They're home now and they're on the computer. They're trying to figure out how to use Zoom and all of these different things. So out of our pushback, I created the Ocean Hill Brownsville Alliance, where we now have a physical space where we can invite people in and be socially distanced and conduct workshops. And I plan. We actually have our first workshop the first week, and we are using art as a way to connect with the community. We're kind of calling them like art and agency workshops, where we're empowering the community to ask questions and just making them more comfortable with asking when they are feeling weary. Because I noticed with our elderly community here in Atlantic Plaza Towers, they're just so afraid of losing their house or losing their apartment if they speak out against anything. It's just so much fear in my community, but because I feel like we self-police here because we have been over-surveilled for so long, and it's kind of a post-traumatic stress kind of situation. So I want to empower people to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves in the space that they pay to live in. So I just wanted to like put that in there too. Like the same way we have to get this information to our youth, we have to sit down and be patient with our elderly people and tell them what their rights are and let them know to be aware of how their data could be used, or just all of this, just familiarizing them with this new data society that we're in, and not having them feel alone, and allowing them to make knowledgeable consent when something like a notice about facial recognition coming to their home is slid under their door. So that's all I wanted to say. Just we have to look out for our elderly folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Shalini, did you want to add to the question of the importance of?
Yeah, I just want to loop in and bring in that point you were making about science fiction. Is that in the making of Coded Bias, through the work of Meredith Broussard, I learned that there was always this conversation between artists and writers of science fiction and sort of technology developers of AI. And I think our imagination about these technologies has been so limited. I feel like the way that I came through this technology was actually through sci-fi. And you see how many fantasies we have of like, I don't know, men falling in love with their AI, which is like one particular type of imagination about AI. And I feel like we've been so limited about our imagination here. And I think that a small group of people have sort of convinced us to believe that this technology can only work with one economic model where we're exploited, or it only has to be optimized for this group of people. And I think that in the making of this film, and by centering different people in the conversation, my imagination about what these technologies could be is different. And so I really hope that part of the process is like sparking our imaginations about like in art, the limitations define the creativity, right? Like your budget defines what film you get to make. And in technology, I feel like we should give them some limitations, like democratic values and civil rights, and see how creative they can be within those restrictions. And so I really hope that the first step is also changing our imagination about how these technologies could work and bringing more people's imagination into that conversation.
That's wonderfully said, Shalini. Thanks so much. I think sort of like building on this conversation we've been having about the different ways to build coalition, combining documentary, fiction, science fiction, and different forms of art. We wanted to close with a work of performance art from Joy Buolamwini. And it's so interesting because it's just not just about reciting a research paper or something like that. It's about finding another way to reach people's hearts and help them overcome that fear and that confusion that that power likes to use against us. So to close, I would love to hear from Joy with this wonderful poem.
Yes, so there are bits and snippets of this poem in the film Coded Bias, and I was inspired to write it because of the courage of the Brooklyn tenants, and so it's named in their honor, to the Brooklyn tenants. To the Brooklyn tenants, resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces. We celebrate your courage. No silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, hallway gatherings, Sharpies and posters, coalitions, petitions, testimonies, letters, research and potlucks, documentaries and panels, dancing and music. Everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around the world, persisting and prevailing against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of math destruction. We stand with you in gratitude. You demonstrate the people have a voice and a choice. When defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights, the victory is ours. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy, for that wonderful poem. Thank you so much, Shalini, for this wonderful documentary. Thank you so much for the panelists for opening up and really lighting a fire for people for all the different ways that they can overcome that fear and just build connections with people. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the audience. You all have a wonderful night.
Who owns the code? Yeah. Who owns the code? Who owns the code? Yeah. Who owns the code? Who owns the code? Are you ready? Put you a few verses if you're ready. Are you ready? Collecting data, chronicling our past. Often forgetting to deal with gender, race, and class. Again, I ask, ain't I a woman? Face by face, the answers seem uncertain. Who owns the code? 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 Can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? Can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? with gender, race, and class. Again, I ask, ain't I a woman? Face by face, the answers seem uncertain. Who owns the code? 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 Who